Welcome everybody to our webinar today, what we learned from deploying an employee chatbot at a global insurance organization. Hope you're able to hear me right now. I'm going to start broadcasting my second screen here. Do you see that? If you can just send me a little note in the chat console and go to webinar that you're seeing everything and hearing me, that would be great. Anybody, just send through a little chat there for me so I know that it's 100%. So you'll notice the GoToWebinar control panel, and throughout this this webinar, you're welcome to ask questions, and I'll probably won't do them or answer them at that moment, but at the end of the webinar we will. So just looking for some confirmation from someone that you can hear me and see my screen. So go to the chat in the GoToWebinar control panel, or just state it. Perfect, good. They're all coming through now. Thanks everybody. And so now I'm going to start broadcasting my screen and we will get into it. So I haven't given this webinar before, so I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to take, but it's not going to take any longer than an hour, probably more like 40 minutes. But our basic agenda is a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about why this global company, which we're going to call Citadel, we're actually working on a full case study of them, and at that point we'll be able to talk specifically about who it is. But until that case study is out, we're going to work under the moniker Citadel. We're going to talk about why Citadel chose a chatbot, the process we used in deploying it, then get into the meat about the key learnings we had, and finally how you can get started on a chatbot project. And the target audience for this webinar is directors of communications, HR managers, intranet managers, and others leading a chatbot project or who hope to lead a chatbot project for employees within usually larger companies. And just for some very basic background information, I think most of you know this, but what is the chatbot? Well, a chatbot is a software program that runs inside your messaging app. When you message a chatbot, the computer responds. I think we're all using messaging apps all the time, whether we're using iMessage or WhatsApp or plain text messages, and we're messaging our friends, our family, and our colleagues. In most major companies, you've got some sort of messaging app installed internally, like Jabber or Slack or Skype for Business and so on. A chatbot just shows up as one of your contacts. And when you message it, instead of a person messaging you back, it's a computer. And closely related to the notion of chatbots, which are delivered over any of these channels you see here along the bottom, is the concept of conversational UI. A conversational UI user interface is a user interface that mimics speaking to a real human, whether by text or voice. And with conversational UI, you don't have to learn an interface, you just need to type or talk. You don't have to learn certain commands either. You just use normal human language and it understands it. And I really think conversational user interface is the future of user interface. I mean, we're still going to continue to use graphic user interfaces for many things. But when you watch a kid or a young child especially use a phone or a tablet, they go straight to the voice command. My young boy, if he wants to draw a picture, he says, "Hey Google, show me a picture of a parrot," right? Rather than type it. And that's common for young kids. So let me show you what a chatbot might look like. This is a chatbot we built for the Intranet Now conference. And if you type in the URL m.me/intranetnow, it brings you to your messaging app, and you click Get Started, and it gives you a little welcome message. You can traverse a menu along the bottom of the chatbot, or you can send a message, like we could say, "What is Chris McGrath talking about?" And it'll give you the name of the session that I was presenting at this conference. Chatbots Now, there's a little summary of it. And we can ask the chatbot, who is Chris? And the chatbot wisely responds with both Chris's that we're speaking at this event. You can click to view the details, the bio of either of those Chris's. And you can type what's next, and it'll show the session that's coming next. It looks at the current time and says, well, here's what's coming after this session. So that was just to serve as an introduction to what chatbots are. I think most of you had that down pat, but just in case, we're starting right from the beginning there. So why did Citadel decide on a chatbot? As we've shared, they're a global insurance company. Well, first and most importantly, they had a business need, and the business need was they're relocating their head office. So when you're moving to a head office, employees have so many questions about the move. Questions like, when are we moving? Is there anywhere to eat near the new office? Do I get a discount at the gym? What's the nearest tube station? So that was the need. They needed to answer those questions. And for the global internal comms team, the thought of building yet another microsite or a SharePoint page for this, well, just boring, right? Sometimes we need some stimulation as internal comms team, and they wanted to do something interesting and new and shiny, and sometimes we need that, right? Another thought that they had is every single employee has Skype for Business installed on their desktop. In fact, in the new office, there were going to be no desk phones at all. So if you want to make or receive any kind of phone call, you have to have Skype for Business running. And so they saw an opportunity there to have just yet another contact alongside your actual human contacts. That would be the chatbot that you could ask questions of. And they considered some of the other benefits of chatbots. Another one is that you don't need to context switch when you're using a chatbot. You already spend a lot of time in your messaging app, and instead of opening a web browser, typing in a URL, perhaps logging into an intranet, navigating to a page to get the information, you can just stay where you already are. Just send a message to that chatbot contact you have there and ask it, hey, when are we moving? Why are we moving? What's the name of the Wi-Fi network? How do I book a meeting room? And so on. Another consideration for them is that chatbots make it, because the medium forces brevity, you can't be long within a chatbot. Those messages are easy to read and easy to write. And so that was compelling. And probably the biggest consideration is that chatbots are just so easy to use. If you know how to talk, if you know how to type, you know how to use a chatbot already. And I think sometimes as technology experts ourselves, I assume that all of you on this webinar, you're all technology experts, we don't fully grasp how weak computer skills of the average user really are. This is a chart from a report on a study of 216,000 people that Nielsen Norman Group reported on last year. And they reported that either 5 or 6% of people in Canada, the UK, and the USA have strong computer skills. 2/3 are in the categories of can't use, terrible, or poor. And even those strong computer users, an example of a task that a strong computer user can complete is they can look at details sent to them from 3 different emails from 3 different people proposing a time for a meeting, and then book a meeting that's at the best time for those 3 people. That's something that a strong computer user can do. So it doesn't mean you're a programmer or something like that. When you're, it really just means you can parse information and sort through email effectively. That makes you a strong computer user, right? So I think user skills are much weaker than we realize, and the average person can't use this. You know, SharePoint is way easier to use than it used to be, but the average person, this is still overwhelming. But chatbots, everybody understands this. Right? You can scroll up for the history. You've got back and forth conversation bubbles, short snippets of text. Everybody gets this. And so here's a quick demo of what you can do in Citadel's chatbot here. You can ask things like, why are we moving? Even spelled incorrectly, it gets it. When is the move? It shares the date of the move with them. what is the nearest tube station? It answers, what's the address of the new building? And it gives it to them. Now, if you have any questions about anything you see, go ahead and type that into the questions panel, and we'll get to it later on in the webinar. So next, let's talk about the process that we used. So here's our basic project plan. We're going to look at this for the next 10 or 15 minutes. You can see it's divided into 4 different streams. We found this useful in technology projects. The first stream vertical is project, that just things about running the project. Next are aspects of the project that have to do with the technology, then the content, and then engagement. Engagement first of the stakeholders and then of the users. We find that everything in a technology project falls nicely into one of these streams. So the steps we see here on this first screen are steps that you really need to take for any technology project. These aren't specific to chatbots. First, you want to define the team that you're working with, make that clear. Next, you create a project hub or somewhere where you can collaborate on the project. With Citadel, we did this with a Yammer group. Next, you want to establish your meeting cadence. I find that there's nothing like a weekly status meeting to make things move forward, and that's what we did with Citadel. Next, you need to determine your business objectives. And often that's done before bringing in a vendor. In the case of Citadel, their business objectives were to answer employees' questions about the move. And second, to gradually expand beyond that to answering questions about the day-to-day work environment. They were really imagining that this would be like a virtual information desk. If you imagine walking into the head office or the main lobby of a big office, and there being an information kiosk with the big letter I on it, an information desk. They wanted the chatbot to be able to answer anything you might be able to ask an information desk. Next, we find it really useful to turn those business objectives into user stories, simple stories that you can that phrase the business objective in a human readable way. For example, as an employee, I want a quick way to get the guest Wi-Fi password so that I can provide it to office visitors. That's a very brief user story, and it's got a who, a what, or a why. The who is the employee. The what, I want to be able to get the guest Wi-Fi password. The why, so I can provide it to office visitors. So putting your business objectives into that format makes them relatable and serves as a touchstone later in the project to ask, have I delivered on those user stories? And then the last step on this page is to formalize your decision-making process to decide what we often call a RACI, who is responsible, who is accountable, who is consulted, and who is informed for the major steps of the project. So the overall project success, and then each of these streams, technology, content, engagement, who's responsible, who's accountable, and who's consulted and informed. And making those decisions up front just makes for a smoother project. So next in our key steps, 2 of 4, we're getting into things that are a little bit more specific to chatbots. You want to select your bot channels. So in the case of Citadel, the channels that they wanted to deliver on were Skype for Business and also an embedded SharePoint web part. So they could have a little embedded web chat within their SharePoint site. Next, you want to choose your employee data source. Oftentimes, that's going to be Active Directory, or maybe it'll be an export of your from an HR system. Then you start getting into the content. You want to look at what are the existing content sources I have that will meet these business objectives, that will provide the information we need. It might be your intranet or something else. Next, a step that we take is brainstorming questions that people might ask the chatbot. And so here's an image of some of the brainstorming that was me at Citadel there, and behind is some of the brainstorming we did for what questions we're going to ask, or people might ask the chatbot. And so the way we did that is with a group of half a dozen or a dozen people. We give them all a bunch of sticky notes and give them 10 minutes to silently write down all the things that you think people are going to ask this chatbot, working within the sandbox of our business objectives. And then after they did that, we get them all to mount them up on the board, and then we group them into things that are similar and then continue to come up with new ideas. So it's a brainstorming exercise to give you that initial body of content to work with for the chatbot. Next, we want to define the chatbot personality, and if it's going to have a name, give it a name. So we did that by looking at things like these scales like this, like should it be understated or enthusiastic? Should the conversation feel formal or informal? You know, formal might be welcome to the chatbot, or very informal might be, hey friend, cool to have you here. Should it be only text, or should it be, you know, purely emoji, or should it be somewhere in between? So we looked at a bunch of scales like this to come to a consensus on what the personality would be like. We also looked at words that could describe a personality or the way that the chatbot would interact with the user, and asked everybody in the room to pick 5, giving them a list of 50 adjectives like this. And we reduced that from that little exercise down to, we wanted to be amusing and charming, creative, enthusiastic, humorous, intelligent, patient. The ones in capitals were the ones that came up the most in the little survey we did there. They wanted the chatbot to be friendly, helpful, practical, and they did choose a name for it, Sid, just a play on the name Citadel. So the next strip here of key steps is we started writing sample answers, things of the ways that the chatbot would reply. We designed an icon and logo type, and we can just have a look at that actually if we skip over to our demo here. Here's a demo site, and if we open up the web chat, this is the Tangowork management console here. And if I just type hi, you can see that this is a plain Jane chat interface here. But I'm now going to just execute a little API call to apply a look, and then reload this. And now the chatbot looks a little bit different. Different colors, it's got a little logo, it's got a little initial prompt here. We made the font bigger, and now it says, say hi to Sid, you know. Okay, hi Sid. And so there's not a lot of design work that you can do on a chatbot, right? It's not like designing a website or designing an intranet, but there is a little bit of branding you can do, just in terms of colors, font, logo. So next, we established what our metrics were going to be, right? Things that we're going to measure, and that's a good thing to do up front in your project, any technology project really, to establish what your metrics are going to be. Then we planned the pilot and the launch periods, and then next you want to import your users and lists, train your administrators, apply the look like we just did, and then you're ready to really start building out the chatbot. And so you see here these first 4 steps, these run in a loop. You want to configure your intents and entities, populate your content, train the AI engine, test it, and revise it. So let's actually look at doing that in a sample scenario. And this is just like we did at Citadel. We're going to go to this to our Tangowork content management interface here, and let's create something around meeting rooms. People are going to ask when they move to the new building, how do I book a meeting room? So what's the user's intention? Let's just call it meeting rooms. What will the user say? They're going to say, I don't know, how do I book a meeting room? Need a conference room? Well, what kinds of meeting rooms do we have? These are just some suggestions. The AI on the back end extracts the important parts of speech here, so that we don't need to enter every possibility, right? We give it a few and it'll figure out the rest. And then how will the chatbot answer? Well, we could say something like, to book meeting rooms, go to Citadel/meeting rooms, as if we have some sort of system for booking. So we save that. And we see this little flag come up here to say, to see changes in chat, train the language model. So because we just added new utterances, we need to click this, and now it's actually going through some machine learning processes so that any kind of utterances around booking meeting rooms will be trained. And that usually takes 15 seconds or so. Training complete. So now we say, how do I book a meeting room? To book meeting rooms, go to Citadel/meeting rooms. Okay, great. Well, so imagine that we had done this and we realized, well, people want to know a lot more than just this. Like maybe they want to know what kinds of rooms we have. So if I can expand this a little bit and add a new message. Why don't we say, give it a title, types of meeting rooms. And we have small, medium, and large meeting rooms, right? I'm sure your response will be a little more sophisticated than that. Maybe we want to say, talk about ordering food. To order food for meetings, go to Citadel/meeting rooms. Or maybe you give a phone number or something like that, right? And this is the first message we entered. Why don't we call this booking meeting rooms? So now, if I say, how do I book a meeting room? It brings up cards, 3 different things. Now, we don't have any images for these, so rather than show cards, let's say display this as a numbered list. And why don't we give it a prompt, say, pick a number. We save this, and I need to book a meeting. Now, notice what it says here, pick a number, ordering food, types of meeting rooms, booking meeting rooms. Maybe it would be nice if we displayed this alphabetical instead of by newest. So I just click here and say sort by alphabetical, save, book meeting room, pick a number, booking meeting rooms, ordering food, types of meeting rooms. Anyway, you can see how you could go through, you iterate and iterate and iterate, improving the response to the content. So back to our main presentation here. After you've gone through this loop and you're really happy with your content, you want to conduct a pre-pilot review, probably looking back in those initial user stories, right? And saying, does my chatbot now deliver on those user stories? And then you're going to run a gradually expanding pilot. Unlike a website or an intranet, a small team cannot thoroughly test a chatbot. Because the content is open-ended, right? A user could potentially ask anything of the chatbot, and a small team can't come up with all those variables. So you need to gradually increase the size of the pilot. First, you go to 10 people, then 20, then 50. That's what we did at Citadel. And as the transcripts come in, you study those and see where's the chatbot succeeding, where's it failing, and then adjust. Then you launch, and then reviewing transcripts and revising that is an ongoing activity to keep your chatbot healthy and effective. So again, if you got any questions about anything that we saw so far, type those into the GoToMeeting control panel, and we'll come to those at the end of the session. So next, let's talk about what we learned from deploying this chatbot at a global company. So the first thing we learned is to focus on a narrow domain. Unless you have a massive budget, you don't want to try to build Siri, right? Things like Siri or Google or Alexa or Google's voice control, those things have hundreds of engineers working on them. If you try to build that for a company, it's just absolutely overwhelming. So at Citadel, they managed employee expectations by focusing the chatbot on the head office relocation. Ask the chatbot anything about the move. And then they expanded that to answering questions about the day-to-day work environment, like where can I print? What's the Wi-Fi password? Do I get a discount to the gym? If you look at this example from Siri, you can see that even Siri, with all those engineers, can't do everything, right? Siri, I'm bleeding really bad. Can you call me an ambulance? From now on, I'll call you an ambulance. Okay. Right. They handle this scenario properly now, but it just demonstrates the difficulty of trying to build a chatbot that can do anything. So we really saw that you need to focus on a narrow domain when building a chatbot, and this office move was a nice narrow domain for us to start with. So here's a few examples of chatbots that have a reasonable scope that you might consider for your employee chatbot. It might be a news bot where you can ask things like, what's the latest company news? That's simple. Or it might be an event bot centered around a specific employee event, right? Where you can ask questions like who's speaking today, or who's speaking now, or what's next. Maybe it's a contacts bot where it answers questions about who is Pat Davis, or what's the number for Pat Davis, or who's the director of IT. That's a reasonable scope. Or it could be a subject matter expert like we did for Citadel. Everything about the head office move. When are we moving to the new HQ? So those are all chatbots with reasonable scopes. The second thing we really saw the need for is to be brief. Right? Distractions abound in the workplace, and especially if you deployed your chatbot on a phone. When people are on phones, there's always something distracting them. So you've got to keep your replies really short. I think a nice example of this is the CNN news bot. If you look at this little illustration, on the left is a chatbot, or is a news story optimized for chatbot, and on the right is that same news story optimized for mobile. And you can see how much longer it is on mobile. And that's fine for mobile, but for chatbot, you really got to make it super short so it fits within that window. So we really saw that at Citadel. They need to keep things super short. Next, you want to avoid modality. A modal state is a state where your bot is expecting a certain type of response. But your user might be interrupted and not be able to respond in the way you want them to. So here's an illustration. The bot says, nice to meet you, where are you located? But the user just wants the Wi-Fi password. So they say Wi-Fi. I don't understand that. Where are you located? Wi-Fi password. I don't understand that. Where are you located? That becomes a very frustrating interaction. So you want to avoid that state. So if we go back to this sample chatbot that we're working with here on Citadel, when we say meeting rooms, it comes back with a list, right? Pick a number, 1, 2, or 3. Now, a modal state would be where it would only accept 1, 2, or 3. What we do in Tangowork is we're looking for 1, 2, and 3, but if we don't see 1, 2, or 3, we evaluate it as if it's brand new. So show me Chris McGrath's bio. It doesn't say, sorry, give me a number. It just interprets that as it should and gives me the bio. So that's avoiding a state of modality. Fourth, you want to design failure carefully because users are going to fail, so you want to steer them back towards supported tasks. Here's an example. The user says, stupid bot. You know, they're angry. And the bot says, I don't understand, please try again. The user says, right? I don't understand, please try again. When the bot fails, you want to steer the user back into the realm of supported tasks. So a better response, and what we did at Citadel is something like that. If somebody says stupid bot, the chatbot responds with, it recognizes that the user's frustrated. And so it brings back, looks like you might appreciate some help dealing with me. Pick from this list, how to use me, what I know, where to access me, who can access me, who maintains me. And this response is more likely to calm the user down and bring them back into the fold, right? It is worth noting, though, with employee chatbots, you have a more receptive audience than you do with consumer chatbots. See, in the consumer world, the consumer can immediately switch to another chatbot or abandon. But you have a bit more of a captive audience with employee chatbots, and they tend to be a little more forgiving of mistakes, and so that's nice. That's an advantage we have as internal comms teams deploying chatbots. So the fifth thing we learned, and we talked about this earlier, is the importance of growing your pilot gradually. Because it's impossible to anticipate what users will say, no matter how much upfront brainstorming and content work you've done, users are going to ask the chatbot things that you never imagined. So at Citadel, they initially launched at 10 employees, then 20, then 50. We carefully monitored every conversation transcript, noting where the chatbot succeeded and where it failed. And whenever it failed, we either trained the AI to handle the user input or we added the missing content. And by the time we launched to all employees, the chatbot could correctly handle most anything. And so here's what that chart might look like. The white line is the percentage of incorrect responses from your chatbot. So when you first turn on this switch, 100% of your responses are incorrect, right? The chatbot can't do anything. But as you put in the content, that plummets rapidly, and then it slopes off. It's a little harder to get that long tail of correct responses. The orange line is the number of chatbot users. So when you first start, way at the left, almost 0% of your total potential audience is using the chatbot, and you gradually tweak that upwards, going to more and more people as the chatbot improves in its accuracy. And then once your incorrect responses are down in the 5 to 10% range, you're okay to launch, and you go ahead. Let me show you an example of what you see in the early period of a chatbot. This is from that Intranet Now chatbot I showed you earlier, and this is Catherine from Step 2. They're the intranet consultancy in Australia that some of you might be familiar with. And this is her first interaction with the Intranet Now conference bot a few months ago. So the chatbot, she says hello. The chatbot says, hi, this is the Intranet Now conference bot. See the menu below for options. And she says, what menu? Now, we didn't anticipate that. The menu is referring to the Facebook menu, Facebook Messenger menu at the bottom. But it doesn't, the chatbot doesn't understand correctly, so it just gives her a list of all the sessions. And then she says, what's the closest train station? We hadn't thought of that either. We were sharing where the closest tube station is, but she didn't ask about tube station, she asked about train station. Then she asked, what should I wear? Well, that's a good question for a conference, right? Again, we didn't anticipate that one either, so the chatbot is just confused. And then she says, how far is the walk from London Bridge Station? The chatbot didn't understand that either. It says, we expect over 220 attendees. So that's 100% fail transcript, right? And it just shows how many things you think you've thought of it all, and then you open it up, and wow, bam, 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 everything she asks is a fail. But because we're monitoring the transcript, within a half hour of this conversation, we were handling all of these correctly, right? So now, what menu? It says use the messenger menu to navigate at the bottom near where you type, or try these commands. You ask, what is the closest train station? It says Hilton London Bankside is close to several train stations, and it lists them. What should I wear? It gives an answer, even includes a photo so you can look at what people were wearing last year. It's reviewing transcripts is fascinating. It's like doing user testing. If you've ever done user testing on an intranet or a website, you know how revealing it is. And with chatbots, it's like you're doing constant user testing because you can look at those transcripts and you get real insight into what your user is thinking. The sixth thing we learned is the importance of having one killer feature, or at least one killer feature. So you want to ask yourself, what's the one thing your chatbot will do to keep employees coming back again and again? And for Citadel, it's getting the password for guest Wi-Fi. The password for guest Wi-Fi changes every week. It's the same in every office, and every visitor to the office wants the Wi-Fi password. And so now any employee can send a quick Skype message to the chatbot just saying, what's the Wi-Fi password? And they get an instant reply. So this whole notion of the one killer feature is something that's important in every piece of software. It reminds me, my last startup was Thought Farmer. I don't know if you've heard of Thought Farmer before. They're a social internet software platform. It's used by a few hundred companies around the world. And one of our early clients was IDEO. They're a renowned design studio based in the Silicon Valley. And when they deployed their Thought Farmer intranet, they put some key payroll information, a change to payroll. They put it on their Thought Farmer intranet, and it was the only place where you could find out about this payroll info. Well, guess how that affected launch, right? Everybody is concerned about their pay, and any change to pay, everybody jumped straight on the intranet and went there, and it was a great way to introduce users to the new intranet. The great thing about this Wi-Fi scenario is people need it all the time, and because the password changes every week, they're constantly going back to the chatbot to ask for it. So ask yourself, what will my one killer feature be? The seventh thing we learned, and I think we've already touched on this to some extent, is just the need to review your transcripts constantly. Most of your time is spent on exceptions, exception handling, the long tail of user queries. So the things that people ask 80% of the time, that doesn't take very much of your time. You look after that right away, but it's all the other things they ask. And because of what we learned with Citadel, we built some special features into Tangowork around the collaboration on the transcripts. So you can see right here within Tangowork, here's this transcript we had. It says, hi Sid, hi, how do I book a meeting room? To book meeting rooms, go here. Notice some of the things here. Greeting is an 86% score. So it shows you how confident the artificial intelligence engine is that it got the right response. And you can also edit the message right from here. So if I see, like, pick a number, maybe I want to change the way that it says this. So I click edit this intent, and on my lists, instead of pick a number, maybe I want to say, I don't know, choose from these options. And I save that, and notice it makes a little note for me here that the intent has been edited. And so when I'm collaborating with other editors of the chatbot, they can see that I worked on this. And I might even add a note, and I say, I simply changed the prompt. I might add a note over here and say, are we handling a situation where a person asks about a personal phone call room? And see, when I make that little note, it appears there with my name, my date, and other collaborators can now go in here on the transcript and work from here. And so it becomes this little collaboration area. And we built in these features because we just saw how much time we were spending studying transcripts and trying to improve it. And this this little collaboration, this notes feature makes it that much more efficient. And finally, we'll just touch on a couple of the technical things that we learned through deploying this global chatbot. The first, there's just two of them. The first is that embedding a chatbot in SharePoint is simple. It's just an iframe. We didn't know this before we started. We had never embedded a chatbot in SharePoint before, and I was just worried that something would go wrong. I don't personally have a lot of experience with SharePoint. Most of my intranet experience is on custom intranet solutions, and I was wondering, is this going to be a gotcha? Well, it was a slam dunk. It's just an iframe. There's a little tiny hunk of code that goes on the SharePoint page that generates a new secret for the iframe token. Just a little thing to keep that iframe completely secure and disposable, so it can only be used for the current user. Yeah, it didn't take any time at all. And we were also able to easily customize it to match the look of the SharePoint site. We also added user tracking. Even though it's an anonymous iframe, we integrated it with SharePoint in a way so we could pass in the current username, and so we can track their transcripts on the back end. And so it was all good news. SharePoint, a chatbot on SharePoint is simple. The second thing we learned that we didn't know before we started with Citadel is that Skype for Business is quirky, and it's the most difficult chatbot channel we've worked with. There's no photos available on Skype for Business, no buttons, no menu items. You don't have any control over the fonts. But there's two positives in working with Skype for Business that came out of that. First of all, the knowledge that it's merging with Microsoft Teams. So sometime in 2018, it's moving into the Microsoft Teams fold, and Microsoft Teams has really strong, powerful chatbots. So that's a good thing. But second, because it doesn't do images or menus or buttons, it's forced us to focus on the most important thing, and that's understanding natural language and providing a succinct textual reply. And so I think those limitations helped us to build a better chatbot that was really focused on the language, which is what chatbots are supposed to be. Briefly on how to get started. If you're interested in an employee chatbot, I think first of all, you want to be convinced about the reality that this is coming, this is necessary. Already 40% of millennials are using chatbots on a daily basis. That's according to a report from last summer. And according to Gartner's top strategic predictions for 2018 and beyond, by 2021, more than 50% of enterprises will spend more per annum on bots and chatbot creation than traditional mobile app development. Chatbots will become the face of AI. And then if we look at the growth rate of chatbots, I've noticed that they closely monitor or follow the growth rate that we saw in websites about 20 years ago. Chatbots are growing at about 300% a year. That's the rate that websites were growing 20 years ago. And we know where that ended up, right? Within a few years, you've got millions, tens of millions of chatbots. In the beginning, it seems to grow imperceptibly, but that compounding after a few years adds up. And that's what Bill Gates said in his book, The Road Ahead. He says, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing right now with chatbots, is it seems like maybe not that much has happened. There's a ton happening. Like, we're absolutely seeing a 300% or more growth rate in chatbots, and over a few years, it means we're just going to have millions and millions of chatbots out here. So this is coming. You want to convince yourself of that. And this is where I'm going to do a bit of a sales pitch. The way to start, I think, is with Tangowork. Right? This is the only product like it for deploying chatbots for employees. Right? It doesn't cost that much. And even for Citadel, like, this is a major project, we didn't spend more than 100 hours of professional services. And like, we nurtured the team through the process. And so a reasonable monthly fee and some professional services, and you can have a proof of concept chatbot or a production chatbot, depending on your needs, out there. So I would like to take your questions now. So I'm going to have a look here at what you've added, and please feel free to continue to ask additional questions here. All right, we've got a whole bunch. Let me go through them. So Tom asks, what does a user see if there is no result? So Tom, I might need a little bit more context on that. You can add that in, but I think what you're asking about is like a failed result when the chatbot doesn't understand. And so let's try that here in the Citadel chatbot. We'll just say trumpets and xylophones. I don't think the chatbot understands that. Sorry, I don't understand. Try news or help for more ideas. So this is coming from, if we go to system content, it's coming from none. Sorry, I don't understand. And notice you can add a variety of responses in here, and those can be sorted at random. And so it gives a little bit of variety. And again, you want to steer people back towards supported functionality. So if the chatbot was purely about a move, you might say, sorry, I don't understand. I only know about the move. Or it might give some examples of things that the person could ask. Now, there's more than one way you can have a failed response. You could also have, let's look at the staff. So in the sample bot, we've only got the bios for a few different staff members. So if I say, what is the bio for Alan Arkin? I don't actually know what I'm going to get here. Okay, that's probably not the best response. So we can give a little bit more training to the bot so that it recognizes that Alan Arkin is a name, but that it doesn't have a response for that name. And we have custom messages in here. So it says, message to show when no messages match the contact name. It says, I don't have a record for any staff member by the name of Alan Arkin, is how it should respond. And so that's a different kind of no match response, where it understands what the user said, but it doesn't have an answer to that specific question. And so there's a few different ways it can handle those bad responses. Bruce asks, how do you determine the size of your narrow domain? Well, I guess based on your business objectives, right? But I would say go narrower than you think, right? It's much easier to expand as you have success with the chatbot than to pull back, right? So if you start with something very targeted and grow from there, and if you know in advance that you're going to cover everything or like a huge domain, you might start out with multiple with the intention to have multiple bots, a bot that is tailored, say, just for the office move, and a bot that's tailored just for IT questions, and a bot that's tailored just for HR questions. That might help disambiguate a little bit for users. That might be an approach. Another question we have: what are the best options to launch if we're already using Office 365 and a SharePoint intranet? I think, Tom, you probably got the answer to that later on in the webinar. In the case of Citadel, we launched with an embedded SharePoint chatbot, but the main chatbot was within Skype for Business. And you should note that it's only Skype for Business Online that's supported. If you have the old link, Microsoft isn't supporting that for chatbots. It's only the online version. But if you're using O365, that's probably what you already have. If you're using Microsoft Teams, then that would be a logical one to work with too. And even if you're not using Teams, given the knowledge that Skype for Business is moving towards Teams, you'd probably want to start experimenting with Teams right off the bat. Maybe build for Skype for Business because it's the lowest common denominator in terms of it just supporting text, really. So build for that, and then as it fades away and moves into Teams, supporting richer interactions such as photos and buttons and menus, you can start to add that in. Oh, Tom asks, is there a way to tell a user we found an answer to your question now? Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I remember having this thought. I'm glad you wrote that down. That is something we should build, and it wouldn't take long. See, we have the ability to send broadcasts. You see here on the Tangowork interface, a broadcast is something that's sent proactively, right? And so you can send it to any of your users. This is my broadcast. So what you might want to send is something like, we now have an answer to your question, and you would pick the user that you sent this to. So here we can send it to Chris on Facebook, and we could send out a test, and that'll show up on my workplace chatbot. So you can absolutely send things proactively. Well, what we need to do is just automate that a little bit so it identifies where the transcript failed and that there's a new answer to that question, and then to send it. So here we see this is within Workplace by Facebook. Here is that same chatbot embedded here, and you can see that broadcast just came through. It says we now have an answer to your question. So yes, you could do that. We're not doing that automatically right now. It would be a pretty basic customization for us to make, and that'd be a good feature, good idea. Another question, can chatbot answers pull data from a human capital management system like Oracle? In as much as yes, all of that kind of work is a little more custom, right? And so instead of storing the answer within Tangowork, Tangowork is serving to parse the user input and then make an API call to the human capital management system, retrieve the answer, and send it back. Some of the things you'd want to consider there is the human capital management system, can it run at chatbot speed? Can it return responses within milliseconds? Hopefully the answer is yes, and then you would just pass that content right through and send it to the user. But that's a little bit of custom work. Well, there's no out-of-the-box connector for Oracle, I guess I should say. But actually doing that is fairly basic. It's just working with API calls. Even all of Tangowork here is API based, and so we've provided a layer here based on our API, a content management layer. But we ourselves are using our own API. At the core, the product is an API, and so it can extract this content from anywhere. Well, it looks like we've got to the end of the questions. If anything comes up afterwards, feel free to send me an email. Here's my email again. You see it on the screen, chris@tangowork.com, or you can send me a tweet on Twitter. The bottom right, you see my handle there. It's Tangowork. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed and benefited from the webinar, and hopefully we'll see you around the web. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.